Hey guys, I'm just going to take a minute to go over the tools that you'll need to get this job done. At a minimum, this is a minimum, you're going to need a 21mm socket for the lug nuts and the caliper bracket. You're also going to need a 1/2-inch drive socket. You'll need a 3/8-inch drive 13mm for the rotor bolts. You'll need a T50, either a 3-inch long one, okay, or a stubby that you're going to have to grind down. If you notice, this is, can't get the focus, this is ground down to fit through the rotor to get the T50 bolts out. In that case, you'll need an extension. I broke one of these, so definitely having a spare, at least two, will be helpful, because they may be very, the bolts may be rusted in there pretty well. You also need a 3/8 drive ratchet, and maybe an additional extension would have saved my knuckles on some of the wheel studs. All right, I used a C-clamp. It's broken, unfortunately, but just to push the pads in. But you could also crack open the bleeder screw and do the same thing. It would be very helpful to have an impact gun, both 3/8 and 1/2-inch. Some of the other stuff that I used, okay, is some grease to go onto the T50 to remove the bolts out. So that was helpful. I used some nickel anti-seize and a wire brush to clean up the knuckle. The other thing you'll see me do is I end up using the rotor to make an improvised press. You'll need some additional hardware, okay, which are these bolts right here. I use both of these bolts, okay. I prefer these. These are definitely better quality, all right. But we'll start off with this. If you use these bolts right here, this is the Dorman brand, okay, and these are M10 by 1.5 by 50, okay. They're class 10-9 bolts. That's good, and that's the part number. You can find this at almost any auto store. And if you use these bolts, just for your reference, they're going to be a 15mm socket. I also greased the threads. These bolts, which are substantially better and longer, which I found that helpful, use a 17mm socket, and these were purchased from McMaster-Carr. And the part number for these is right there, and they're longer. They're 80mm long, so these worked out much better. I did the job twice on both sides, and you'll see in the method in the video, the impact to screw these in once it started worked better than trying to use a ratchet, because it caused the Torx bits to spin. To counteract that, I used a little bit of Loctite on the Torx bit, and I let it sit and harden up, and then I whacked it with the impact gun, and the Torx bits did not move. That'll make more sense in the video. If you need to replace the Torx bits, okay, that's the part number for replacement Torx bits for the wheel hub. All right, they only come 4 in a pack, right? But Ford uses 5 on the vehicle, so you figure it out. Hopefully you don't damage all of them. What I did was I took 3 of the Torx bits and I set them aside, and I used them for the opposite side. So I only replaced 3 out of the 5, because you will damage them slightly with the bolt when you ram into the Torx bit. Again, that will make more sense in the video. Alright, the brake caliper pistons were compressed in. We're going to remove the caliper and bracket as an assembly. There are 21mm bolts in the back. One here and one here by the lower ball joint, and then one up top. Alright, it's a little hard to do with one hand, but I use the impact gun to loosen up the 21mm bolts. And with the caliper pistons pushed in with the C-clamp, this whole unit's going to come off. I'm going to pause this and we're going to hang this and set it aside. Alright, the caliper's hung up and set aside. I put the bolts back in place just so I don't lose them. And not that it's really going to help, but it probably makes people feel better. I just spray down the wheel bearing so it can loosen it up off the hub. And then there's also in this little corner, wheel bearing sits right there. It's kind of hard to see with no light. Let's see, I put some light on in there. Right in here is where the wheel bearing meets. And then in there I just spray down. Let that work. Again, I don't really think it's going to help loosen up in this case. They never fall right out. Alright, this is one of the harder parts of this job. You're going to need a T50, and you'll see that there's little holes in here. You have to line up the holes to match the torque bit inside. Take it out of focus. Oop, too much. And there's the torque bit inside. I had to grind this torque bit down to fit inside. You could get a 3-inch, a longer torque bit, but I think the shorter the better, so you don't break them, because there's a lot of rust in there. So I think the longer the torque bit, the more likely it's going to shear under force. So I just took this one and I ground it down so it fit inside. Alright, so we're going to actually remove, there's going to be 5 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to have to pull those out. I'm using an impact. I don't know how you get them out any other way. Alright, I actually just tried to do this with the ratchet. I'm having much better success. You want to make sure that you're completely on the Torx bit, because you don't want to strip these inside. And this is just a 3/8 with a little extension, and they are coming loose. The other side was in there a lot tighter, and there's much more rust. Ah, see, this one's stuck. Alright, I'm going to keep going at it and see if we can loosen it up. Alright, with 2 hands I was able to loosen it up. Again, the biggest thing is make sure that you're all the way down on the Torx bit. You're using a good one, or the best one that you have. I would say you should have 2 T50s, because in case you snap one. Alright, let me get these all taken out and I can show you what it looks like. Alright, you may find that the Torx bolt, although loose, is stuck inside there with no way of getting it out. A little bit of grease. Get it on there. give it a little turn so you make sure that you're secured, and it very gently, it should come right out. Perfect. Let me pause the camera again. Yeah, and this one is also stuck. So. And out it comes. Alright, so there's going to be 5 of these Torx. These are all a little rusty. I'm going to clean them up. There's going to be 5 of them. Alright. This should be a 13. These 5 bolts actually hold on the rotor. Leave those in place for now. Alrighty, I cleaned these bolts up. They look pretty good, except for this one. The corrosion actually ate at the threads, so we're gonna have to put a new bolt in. Alright, so with these 5 T50 Torx out, this ideally should fall right off. Okay, in the perfect world, it's not gonna come off. You cannot take the rotor off without taking the hub off. I know it's a silly system, so don't beat on the rotor unless you're planning on changing them. They are very expensive for a good quality rotor. All right, so this is the tricky part, but we're gonna make it pretty easy. We're going to take off 3 of these 13mm bolts. All right, I got the 3 out. I had to use an impact. There was just no way to get those out. All right. But you need to get, you'll eventually have to get them all out, but just take 3 out for now. All right, so we're going to take 3 of our T50 bolts, and we're actually going to put them back into the hub, but we're not going to screw them all the way down. All right, I'm going to show you what this looks like from the back in just a second, just so you get an idea. It's really hard to see just in general. Let me pause you again. All right, set up. So I'm starting to put the bolt back in, and you'll come from this corner and you can just barely see the threads. All right, so we're just going to turn that in. Of course, I'm doing it one-handed, so bear with me here. It may be easier for me to pause it and come right back. But let's see. Yeah, I'm going to pause it and come right back. What we want to achieve, if you look and get this into focus best I can, the bolt is back in the hub, and right now you'll notice that the rotor will not rotate because it's hitting. All right, we want to turn that T50 in just enough so it covers the threads on the rotor. All right, let me pause it again so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. All right, so now you'll see that the bolt is still sticking out. Get this into focus. The bolt is still sticking out by several threads. And then when I rotate it, it actually covers the threads. It's not hitting anymore. All right, you want to get that as close as possible to the actual back of the rotor. All right, and we're going to do that 2 more times. Now, I specifically chose the 2 on the outside and then 1 over here because I can actually see the other threads right there. I'll show you what it looks like when it's all done. Okay, so I chose the 2 that are actually closest to the front of the car, and then 1 in the rear. All right, now we should be set up. got the light on. You'll see on the bottom, it's going to focus a little bit. On the bottom there's a bolt sticking out, and then you'll see on the top there's a bolt, and you see that when I rotate the rotor, it's, I'm just going to focus a little bit. When I rotate the rotor, okay, it covers the bolts, okay, but the bolts are sticking out. We're making an improvised press using the car, all right? And I also have this one too, which you can, I don't know if it's going to focus, but you'll see the bolt is there, okay? All right. Which leads us to the next thing we should probably talk about is don't be putting any cheap bolts in here. All right, I'll show you the bolts that I'm using. Most of you guys will be able to find these. These are Dorman 980-545. They're actually an M10 by 1.5 by 50. All right, they're 50 millimeters. They're a little short, but they did work for me. And you can pick these up. I think they're under $5 at any auto store. Okay. They are a class 10-9 bolt. You want that or better. Okay. But I will be using these. Okay, these are also an M10 by 1.5 by 80 millimeters long, and they are a 10-9 bolt as well. Okay, this is the item number 9131A138, and these can get shipped to your house by this company. Usually they overnight the parts. They costed me, I think, like $14 for a pack of 10, but they're a way better bolt for this application. Alright, I applied a little bit of grease to these bolts, to the threads, and we're gonna get it, we're actually gonna put it in the hole where the former 13 millimeter bolt was. So we're not going in the open hole where there's no threads. We're actually going through the hub onto the rotor. So through the hub onto the rotor and using those threads. But we need to make sure that we are on top of the hex bolts. I'll show you what that looks like from the corner. Alright, so I'm gonna stick my finger in there. I don't know if you're gonna see. But my finger's here. That's the hole with no threads. Okay, that's would have been the hole that you used to take out the hex bolt. Now we rotated the bolt back in, and now the rotor is covering that bolt, and it has to be snug. Alright, so when we thread this bolt through, it's actually pressing up against that bolt. Okay, and the same is done on the bottom and on the corner. Alright, we're going to do this in real time. The only thing is you have to make sure that the bolt does not turn inwards with it as you're turning down. And in this case it's not, so that's good. And then we're just going to go around and give it a couple turns on each side. And it's going to be on there pretty good. Don't be surprised. You can see the bolt. Alright, it took me 2 attempts, and we finally have it separated. Alright, perfect. Alright, now it'll be off. You'll be left with 2 13mm bolts. Just gonna pop this out. 1, 2. And don't expect this thing to come off voluntarily either. Yeah, it's easier to see from the back, but you have to rotate so it can slide off from the rear. Alright, we just whacked it with a mallet and it came apart. Success. Alright, we're just going to prep this with a wire brush. That's the wheel speed sensor right there. You could take it out. I'm not going to. I don't want to take a chance of anything else breaking on this thing. I'm just going to be careful though. I'm going to clean it out real good. Alright, I cleaned up the old rotor as best I can. I prepped up the assembly. I used some anti-seize so I don't have to deal with that again. Now we have to assemble the hub assembly. A little bit of Loctite. And we're going to put the bolts back in. We're going to have to pull the rotor up at the same time. This is going to take 2 hands, so I'm just going to pause it. Alright, the rotor's back on the hub, fully assembled, and now we're going to put it back up onto the knuckle. Alright, I'm going to pause it again, and we're going to put the bolts in. Alright, the rotor's back on. Now I just got to put the caliper back on, and that's just going to be the reverse operation, the 2 bolts.